Let me give you two numbers separated by 3 years and £115.5 million. In the summer of 2023, Manchester City sold a player from their academy for £1.5 million. They had him for 4 years. They sent him on loan 3 times, to Lincoln City in League One, to Bournemouth, to Blackpool. They never gave him a single first-team appearance. When they finally decided to move him permanently, they sold him for £1.5 million and kept a 25% sell-on clause, the kind of clause you attach when you think a player might be worth something eventually, but you're not sure how much. This week, Chelsea paid £117 million for the same player. £117 million. A British transfer record, surpassing the £116 million Manchester City paid for Elliot Anderson earlier this summer. Same player, same position, same country. 3 years apart. And here is the detail that makes this story more than just a transfer story. Arsenal, the reigning Premier League champions with the Champions League guaranteed, with Mikel Arteta personally leading a charm offensive, identified Morgan Rogers as their #1 forward target this summer. They did the background work. They pursued him. And when Chelsea offered £117 million, Arsenal said no. They refused to pay their own top target's price. Chelsea, without European football next season, said yes without hesitation. This video is about what Xabi Alonso saw that Manchester City missed for 4 years. What Alonso saw that Arsenal measured at £37 million, less than the market decided it was worth. And why the answer to both of those questions tells you everything about what Chelsea just signed and exactly why they needed him. Morgan Rogers was born on July 26, 2002, in Shirley, West Midlands. He grew up a Wolverhampton Wanderers supporter. Manchester City signed him in 2019 when he was 16 years old on the strength of his performances at Walsall's Youth Academy. What happened next is a 4-year case study in the gap between possessing talent and understanding it. Rogers made 0 appearances for Manchester City's first team. He played 5 times for City's under-21 side under Enzo Maresca, scoring twice and providing 1 assist. He was loaned to Lincoln City, to Bournemouth, and to Blackpool across different seasons. The sell-on clause Manchester City kept tells the story precisely. When a club sells a player for £1.5 million and keeps a 25% sell-on, they are saying 2 things simultaneously. First, we don't believe this player will be worth significantly more, so we're happy to sell cheaply. Second, just in case we're wrong, we'll take a quarter of any future profit. City were wrong. The 25% sell-on of £117 million is worth approximately £29 million to them, a figure that, in retrospect, they received for failing to identify what they had. Rogers signed a 7-year contract at Stamford Bridge and becomes the most expensive British player of all time. The journey from the boy who couldn't get a first-team appearance at the Etihad to the most expensive British player in history ran through 2 clubs that did what City couldn't. They looked at the same player and saw something different. The first person who got it right was not Unai Emery at Aston Villa. It was Michael Carrick at Middlesbrough. In the summer of 2023, Rogers arrived at Middlesbrough on a permanent deal from Manchester City, £1.5 million. In the Championship, for a club that, in the wider context of English football's elite, barely registers. And then Aston Villa came calling. Villa, under Emery, were building something ambitious. Champions League qualification was a realistic target. They wanted Rogers. They made an offer. Middlesbrough said no. They made a second offer. Middlesbrough said no again. They made a third offer. Middlesbrough said no a third time. Michael Carrick, a former England international who had won the Premier League, the Champions League, and played at the highest level for a decade, had looked at Morgan Rogers and arrived at a conclusion that contradicted the entire market. A player that Manchester City had sold for £1.5 million was, in Carrick's assessment, not available for anything that Aston Villa was willing to pay. Villa eventually paid a fee that could rise to £15 million in January 2024, 10 times what City had sold Rogers for 6 months earlier. Carrick had held out for it. Against one of the most ambitious clubs in English football, with a manager who had won the Europa League and built some of the most entertaining teams in Spain, Carrick refused to move until the price reflected what he believed the player was worth. He was right. But the player Carrick protected was still being systematically undervalued because the next club to assess him would put his ceiling at £80 million, while the market would eventually decide it was £117 million. The same story, the same player, a different number every time someone looked at him. Here is the specific tactical decision that separates Unai Emery's use of Morgan Rogers from Manchester City's 4 years of loan deals. City deployed Rogers in traditional attacking midfield structures, roles that required him to function within Guardiola's positional system, to press from specific triggers, to occupy defined zones. These are structures that reward players who adapt naturally to the system's demands. Rogers, by every account of his time at City, was a player who needed the system to build around his strengths rather than placing him inside a pre-existing mold. Emery understood this. When Rogers arrived at Villa in January 2024, Emery gave him a specific role: roaming central attacking midfielder, free to drift between lines, free to come deep and receive, free to find the pocket between the opposition's midfield and defense and drive through it. The result was immediate and quantifiable. In his first full season at Villa, 2024-25, Rogers registered 14 goals and 15 assists across 54 appearances. He was directly involved in 29 goals for a club that reached the Champions League quarterfinals. Not 14 goals from a striker in a penalty box. Not 15 assists from a creator in a fixed number 10 position. 14 goals and 15 assists from a player who is functionally everywhere on the pitch simultaneously, who drops to receive, drives forward, arrives late, combines quickly, and finishes. Alonso described what he bought precisely this week. His best quality is that he's flexible. In that pocket position close to the striker, close to the other 10, but he's played on the right side as well. We will play him where he feels he's enjoying his game, where he feels his flow. Flow, that is the word. A player who City tried to fit into their system and couldn't. Who Emery identified needed a system built around his flow. Who Alonso, the manager who transformed Granit Xhaka by understanding his flow, who spent 4 years at Bayer Leverkusen building entire tactical architectures around individual player strengths, has now chosen as Chelsea's centerpiece. The pattern is the argument. Between Emery establishing Rogers as a Premier League elite player and Chelsea paying £117 million for him, one thing changed the valuation more than anything else: the 2026 World Cup. Rogers made 5 appearances for England at the tournament under Thomas Tuchel. He provided the assist for Anthony Gordon's goal in the semi-final against Argentina, the goal that took England to their first World Cup final since 1966. Think about what that appearance represented in market terms. Not just a goal contribution in a World Cup semi-final, the most watched football match in the world that day, against the world champions, in a moment that defined England's entire tournament. The player that Manchester City sent to Lincoln City on loan in League One had just assisted in a World Cup semi-final against Argentina. The market's response was instantaneous. Villa's valuation, which had been in the £80 to £100 million range before the tournament, moved to above £116 million after it. Arsenal, which had been willing to go to £80 million before the World Cup, found that the price had risen beyond what they were willing to pay. Chelsea decided the post-World Cup price was correct. The interesting question is not whether £117 million is the right number for Morgan Rogers. The interesting question is, what was the right number in 2023 when City sold him for £1.5 million? And what was the right number in January 2024 when Carrick held out for 3 rounds of bids before accepting £15 million? The player did not change between those transactions. The market's understanding of him changed. And the gap between the first number and the last number, £115.5 million, is the cost of that misunderstanding. Rogers was a clear priority for Arsenal in this window. That sentence from The Athletic does not describe mild interest. It does not describe a speculative bid. It describes a club that identified a specific player as the thing they most needed, committed significant internal resources to pursuing him, and then chose not to pay the price the market had established. Arsenal carried out extensive background work on the deal. Arteta led a charm offensive. Multiple Arsenal players were involved in persuading Rogers to choose the Emirates over Stamford Bridge. Arteta went personally. He made his case. The background work was thorough. The desire was real. And then Villa set their price above £116 million, and Arsenal said their valuation was £80 million, and the gap was irreconcilable. When Arsenal were given the opportunity to match Chelsea's £117 million agreement, they chose not to do so. This is the moment that defines the Arsenal story. Not the initial bid, not the charm offensive, not Arteta's personal involvement. The moment they were offered the chance to match the fee and declined. The Premier League champions, with Champions League football confirmed, with Arteta personally invested in the signing, with the player identified as their #1 target, said no to paying what the player was worth. Chelsea, without European football next season, said yes immediately. Rodgers explained why Chelsea ultimately won the race. "I've had a few conversations with him, and I think it's important for me to be here that I need to understand the vision." The vision, not the trophy cabinet, not the European football. The vision Alonso presented for how Rodgers would be used, that pocket position, that flow, was compelling enough to choose Chelsea over Arsenal. Arsenal ended the summer signing Eberechi from Crystal Palace for £67.5 million as an alternative. A good signing, not their top target. Here is the argument that makes this transfer more than just the most expensive British deal in history. Xabi Alonso's career as a manager has been defined by one specific skill: identifying what a player does naturally and building the team around it rather than bending the player to fit the team. At Bayer Leverkusen, Granit Xhaka had been considered at Arsenal a liability. A player whose aggression was a problem, whose positional sense was too rigid, whose temper cost the team. Alonso moved him back into a deeper role, gave him license to step forward in specific moments, and Xhaka became one of the most important players in a side that went unbeaten in the Bundesliga. Alonso said he was delighted to sign Rodgers and described him as a player who would link really well with Cole Palmer, the player around whom Chelsea's attacking structure is built. Palmer and Rodgers, two players who both function in the space between the opposition's defensive and midfield lines. Two players whose defining quality is the ability to receive in tight spaces, turn quickly, and find the next movement before the defense can reorganize. The tactical challenge of playing both is real. The potential, if it works, is the most dangerous attacking combination in the Premier League. Two players who the opposition cannot afford to give space to in a system under Alonso that has been specifically designed to create that space. Rodgers wasted no time making his mark in Chelsea's opening pre-season friendly. He came on at halftime, drove into the box, and produced an excellent finish against close defensive pressure within 3 minutes of his introduction. 3 minutes. His first contribution in Chelsea colors. The same decisiveness, the same instinct to move forward into space, the same finish under pressure. The same player that Manchester City sent to Lincoln City on loan. Here is the question that the entire story has been building toward. Manchester City assessed Morgan Rodgers for 4 years and concluded he was worth £1.5 million. Michael Carrick assessed him and concluded he was worth fighting 3 rounds of bids to protect. Unai Emery assessed him and built a tactical system around his strengths. Arsenal assessed him and concluded his ceiling was £80 million. Chelsea assessed him and paid £117 million without hesitation. Same player, 5 assessments, 5 completely different numbers. The football world, confronted with this sequence, tends to ask, who was right? The answer is more complicated than that question suggests. Alonso was clear about what he saw. Chelsea were desperate for a key player in that position, and there are few better alternatives to Rodgers anywhere in the market. That sentence contains the full argument. Few better alternatives anywhere in the market. Not just in England, not just among British players. In the market, the entire market. If that assessment is correct, and the fee suggests the market agrees, then the question is not whether Chelsea overpaid. The question is whether every previous assessment undervalued the same player. Whether City's 4 years of loan deals, Middlesbrough's 3 rounds of bids, Arsenal's £80 million ceiling, whether all of those were responses to the same misperception. A player who needs a specific kind of system to express his qualities fully will look average in the wrong system. He will look like a loan player. He will look like someone worth £1.5 million. Put him in the right system, with the right manager, the right role, the right tactical license, and he looks like the most expensive British player in history. The system was always the variable. Rodgers was always the constant. Go back to the beginning. The 2 numbers. £1.5 million. Manchester City, summer 2023, after 4 years and 0 first-team appearances. £117 million. Chelsea, July 2026, after a World Cup semi-final assist and a season with 14 goals and 15 assists. The gap between those 2 numbers is not Morgan Rodgers getting better. A player does not improve by a factor of 78 in 3 years. The gap is the market catching up with something that was already there, a quality that the wrong systems made invisible and the right systems made undeniable. Alonso said Rodgers is a great signing who will make Chelsea more competitive. Not eventually. Now, this season, a statement of present-tense confidence in a player the market has spent 3 years gradually discovering. Morgan Rodgers is exactly what Chelsea needed, not because he is the most talented player available, because Alonso specifically identified a role, that pocket position between the striker and the 10, with the freedom to find his flow, and then found the player whose natural game fills that role more completely than anyone else in the market. That is not an accident. That is the same process that transformed Xhaka at Leverkusen. The same process that Emery used to turn Rodgers from a championship loan player into a World Cup semi-finalist. The process is, see the player clearly. Build the frame around what the player actually is, not around what the previous system needed him to be. City never did that. Arsenal wouldn't pay for it when they found it. Chelsea paid £117 million for a manager who does it instinctively, and a player who has been waiting for exactly this. Here is the question I want to leave you with. Football's transfer market is supposed to be efficient. The price is supposed to reflect the value. But the same player went from £1.5 million to £15 million to £117 million in 3 years without changing position or country. Is the market getting more accurate over time as we develop better ways to measure players? Or is it still fundamentally guessing, and the only honest number is the one the last buyer paid? Tell me what you think in the comments. And if you think Arsenal got it right by stopping at £80 million, I want to hear that argument too.